So we have Oleksiy Orlovsky, who is currently in Lviv, and he is a Democratic Practice Program Director from International Renaissance Foundation. And he is going to tell us about self-organized bodies of citizen engagement, and we will see to what extent they are similar or dissimilar to citizen councils that are due to be introduced in Latvia in several years' time at municipal level. Maybe it's the same thing, maybe it's totally different, but we'll see from a conversation with Oleksiy, and we will see how it has worked in Ukraine until now. So, Oleksiy, your remarks will be on something that is quite mysterious sounding to me as a Latvian, namely on self-organized bodies of citizen engagement. And I would be very much interested in learning what this even is. Could you describe how would a self-organized body of citizen engagement work in a typical Ukrainian, I don't know, municipality, or is it active in the region? How does it work?
Thank you, Yvette. Thank you, colleagues, first of all, for organizing this event and opportunity to present our experience. I should say that we have even different interpretation into English this term. So, for example, I used personally self-organization bodies of the population. So this is a little bit other one, but in any case, we mentioned the same bodies. So you're absolutely right, Yvette, that Ukraine is not an absolutely ideal example on many issues of its development, but in some areas we really have unique achievements, unique legislation, unique practice of its implementation and so on, which probably may be useful for many countries. One of such areas is local democracy and all its tools, and a special place in this context is occupied by these self-organization bodies of population. I have been working on the development of local democracy and especially the self-organization bodies for about 25 years in practical, theoretical, normative, and in other plans. Therefore, I will try to share with you only some of the most important, from my point of view, information and my expert assessment. And of course, we can continue this discussion maybe during another event. Of course, there are structures similar to the Ukrainian self-organization bodies of population in other countries, both democratic and authoritarian. I should say that even in our joint history, we have something like the same, like quasi-structures even in the Soviet Union. But a completely different meaning was put into them. No wonder the literature of the Soviet period called them like the drive bells of the Communist Party. Of course, after our independence, we develop a new legislation in this area, and we will be speaking about it a little bit later. If you're speaking about examples in other countries, maybe I should note the neighborhood associations in the United States, or rather sadly in Poland, but they all have very different legal status, different order of creation and functioning. Now I will stay mostly on the case of Ukraine in more detail. It has happened that tomorrow Ukraine will celebrate the 26th anniversary of the adoption of our constitution. It is not for nothing that I mention the main legal act of our state in the context of my presentation. The fact is that it is in the constitution of Ukraine that the framework norms regarding the legal status of self-organization bodies of population are laid. In this regard, we are a unique country in the world that has consolidated its position at such a high level. In the Constitution of Ukraine, we have Article 140, in Part 6 of which there is such a norm. Village, settlement, and city council can allow residents to create house, street, block of flats, and other self-organization bodies of population on the initiative of the residents and give them a part of their own competence, finance, and property. This important constitutional provision became the basis for adoption of a number of other laws. In particular, I should mention the law on local self-government in Ukraine and special law on the self-organization bodies of population, which regulate the legal status of these structures at the national level. Unfortunately, I should say that we still have a number of inaccuracies in the legislation and gaps on the elimination of which we have been working for a long time with the All Ukrainian Association for Community Self-Organization Assistance. So what are the key features of the legal status of the self-organization bodies of population, the process for their creation and functioning in Ukraine? First of all, I must note that the self-organization bodies have the status of representative bodies. In fact, the same as with the local councils. But unlike the local councils, the creation of which is mandatory, the creation of self-organization bodies is optional. Therefore, today they are far from everywhere in Ukraine. Self-organization bodies of population can be created exclusively on the initiative of residents of certain territories, of the house, block of flats, streets, a mini district, or several similar territorial structures. Now, by the way, I should say that we are thinking with our colleagues with necessity present some amendments to our legislation, and that, for example, our legislation, we hope for this, give us chance to create such structures at the level of a separate village or even a city. If, for example, in the new amalgamated communities, territorial communities, we have, for example, few villages, cities, etc., etc. We have such examples, a lot of such examples, frankly speaking, for now. Local self-government bodies cannot themselves initiate the creation of such bodies, but they, for example, can carry out the necessary explanatory work among the local population and activists to stimulate in this way to emergence of new self-organization bodies. An important aspect is that the initiative on the part of the residents is not enough for the self-organization body to appear. A local council, and only a local council, but not its executive bodies, may give its consent to the establishment of such a body or reject such initiative of the people. Thus, the integrity and consistency of the management of the territory by the community is ensured. I should note here that in the community level, it is important to ensure the same rules to making such decision. So we should not orient it here to this personal sympathies or absence of sympathies from the power bodies to the some persons maybe who initiated the establishment of such structures. Therefore, at the community level, in addition to the framework norms of national legislation, it is advisable to have a separate document which would have been approved by at the community level and which would determine the key rules of game, I should say, in the community, and which would close the gaps at the national level. Self-organization bodies are created at a general meeting of the population, only at the place of residence. It is an important aspect since it is impossible to create such structures at the place of study or work. The general meetings of residents of the building blocks of flats, streets, quarters, many districts or districts play a key role in the life of the self-organization bodies. They not only decide on the initiation of the creation of such a body, but turn to the local council for permission. They also approve the regulations of the self-organization body, elect and re-elect on a regular basis the personal composition of these bodies, recall if necessary individual members, listen to annual reports of its activity. They take an initiative before the local councils about delegation to the self-organization bodies, additional powers, etc. The general meetings can make actually any decisions regarding self-organization bodies up to the decision on their liquidation. It is important that in one territory there can simultaneously exist self-organization bodies of different levels. For example, on the same territory, there may be house, micro-district, and district committees. Each of them will have its own territory of activity, which, of course, in this case, will partially overlap. Here it is important not to allow a situation where two or more self-organization bodies of the same level were created on one territory. For example, creation of two house committees will lead to internal conflicts, of course, which could not be allowed. The self-organization bodies are created for a period that should not exceed the term of power of the local council. According to the current legislation, this is 5 years. The decision of the term of power of self-organization body is also made at the general meetings of residents. So as you see, practically all key decisions should be made at this level. Self-organization bodies of population can be legalized as legal entity or without such a status. And again, this is decision not be a local council, but the general meeting of the residents. Regardless of their method of legalization, the legislation provides for 14 so-called own powers of the self-organization bodies, which can be assigned to them from the local council. Among them, I should single out some examples. For example, they can represent together with the local councillors the interests of residents in the power bodies, make in accordance with the established procedures proposals to draft local programs of social, economic, and cultural development of the proper community and draft of local budgets. They can organize on a voluntary basis participation of the population in the implementation of measures for the protection of the environment, carrying out works for environment improvement, etc. They can monitor the quality of housing and communal services provided to citizens and the quality of repairs carried out in these residential buildings and so on. So these are quite some of its own powers. Most of them are functions of representation of interest of residents, as well as their involvement maybe in decision-making process by power bodies at the local level. But the legislation, starting with the norms of the constitutions, provide for the possibility of transferring additional powers to the self-organization bodies of population. In this case, we are talking about the so-called delegated powers. This is no list of powers that can be delegated in our legislation. Our legislation only provides that these cannot be powers that fall within the exclusive competence of the local council. The self-organization bodies of population cannot adopt, for example, a local budget, set of local taxes. They cannot decide any matters connected with the future of communal property. They cannot adopt a city charter, for example, or approve local symbols. But the self-organization body can take over the management of communal property, plots of land, manage them, arrange certain events of social, humanitarian, cultural nature, and so on within the limits of delegated powers. While delegating authority, the local council is also obliged to ensure fulfillment with proper finances and property. As you can see from the above information, the self-organization bodies have a mixed nature. They are included in the system of local self-government of Ukraine as independent subjects. At the same time, they have some characteristics of NGO, condominiums in some reasons, and local self-government bodies. I would also like to briefly draw on the challenges that the self-organization bodies of the population often face in their work. First of all, I should say about a complex procedure for creating self-organization bodies. To create it now, it is necessary to hold 2 general meetings, which is difficult from an organizational point of view. This delays the process of launching the work of the newly created body. I should say that for now, we need at least 4 or 5 months for starting the creating for activity of such body from the beginning. So that is why this problem can be solved by adoption more adequate legislation, of course. Secondly, the general meetings are always hard to assemble, and it is hard to provide a quorum, and even more so to hold elections during general meetings. The simplest solution would be to elect members of self-organization bodies during local elections at polling stations, as a number of other countries have done. But since we do not have the ambiguity of the self-organization bodies, and they are created voluntarily, there is very difficult to realize this idea in practice. Thirdly, I should note that not all local self-government bodies are interested in promoting the development of self-organization bodies. Sometimes the local councils became jealous because they don't want anyone else to have a representative mandate. As a result, there are examples when the process of considering initiatives of residents to obtain consent for creation of such bodies is artificially delayed, which negatively, of course, affect the public initiative. A separate situation, the unwillingness to delegate to the self-organization bodies the powers, additional powers of the local self-government bodies. The next, problem, this is a problem of personnel of the self-organization bodies. Since in Ukraine it is often a non-paid activity, young people and middle-aged people are not always ready to spend time on it. Therefore, it is important to have a system of incentives for the development of a system of self-organization in concrete, for example, city. I should say that with the support of our foundation, International Renaissance Foundation, and this is like Ukrainian branch of Open Society Foundations, a system of resource centers have been created, which provide normative, methodological, organizational, informational, and other kinds of support for their work in different regions of Ukraine. The coordinator of this network is the All Ukrainian Association for Community Self-Organization Assistance, but it is very difficult to cover the whole big country, such big country as Ukraine. And finally, probably I should mention one more problem. These are financial issues. Unfortunately, not all local councils allocate funding to support the activity of their self-organization bodies. I should mention that donors not very often pay attention to their funding support as well. And for the support of such bodies like All Ukrainian Association for Community Self-Organization Assistance, who try to support this movement at the local level. Therefore, the problem of the lack of finance for this work is very actual for Ukraine now, especially at this war time, of course. Again, this list is not full, but in my opinion, despite of all their shortcomings and the problems, it is the bodies of self-organization with their proper development and the creation of proper conditions which show in practice their positive influence of local development issues, forming a sense of belonging to decision-making, bringing new leaders, and so on. Probably I will stop here, and I will be happy to answer your questions and maybe some comments. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. It's a really fascinating, mechanism that you have in Ukraine. The closest analog that I can imagine is what I saw several years ago in Grenoble, France, which is also territorial unit, self-organized. They do get some support from the local government, but they also struggle with attracting people for general meetings and keeping their interest active. And of course, it's common that young people do not really engage to the same extent as other generations. In Latvia, currently, we are moving in a sort of similar direction, but not exactly. And that's why I am interested to learn not only about the challenges that this mechanism has in Ukraine, but also you probably have some observations on those cases where the system works, where it's really successful. Do you see some pattern that might explain why in some cases people are ready to voluntarily self-organize to do something for the good of their community? Is there some pattern that unites these cases?
Absolutely, Yvette, I absolutely agree with you. Yes, of course, we have a lot of positive examples in Ukraine. I had no special time for such part of presentation, frankly speaking, and if it will be interesting for you, we can arrange a separate event on this matter, because we have a lot of examples in different parts of Ukraine. And when somebody asks me on this, I regularly answer on such kind of questions in this way. From my point of view, of course, we should have like a big set of positive elements which will be stimulate for self-organization in any country. But from my point of view, we should have three elements. First of all, and this is the main elements for the positive activity of self-organization bodies. First of all, of course, we should have adequate legislation and some additional norms at the local level, because we have at the national level, we have, of course, we have some legislation, but this is like a frame in many cases, and we need additional regulations at the local level. So this is the first like element for positive development of self-organization bodies. The second one, this is a political will from the local authorities, because as you see, we have a lot of elements which very connected with their cooperation with the local authorities. First of all, with local council. And if they are not very happy, they have a positive meaning on the future development, and as I mentioned in my this speech, some other elements. So this is important to work with the explanation to the mayors, for example, why the development of such instruments will be helpful for this community. And this is extremely important, because we have seen, for example in Vinnytsia city. In this city, we explained why it can be helpful and important for the local authorities to develop these tools, to develop these bodies. And we have a really extremely positive results of their work with local self-government bodies. In other cases, they can block in different way, artificially, all kinds of initiatives from the top. This is the second element. And the third one, we should work with their how to say, like a graduation, maybe a graduating of local people from one side and local authorities, I mean, first of all, middle level authorities from another side. Because we should explain from one side how they can use this instrument. How can they create, for example, self-organization bodies, how they can work with them, what kind of activities can be implemented by these bodies, etc. This is from one side. And from another side, again, we should explain people who will be working with them on the daily basis from local authority side, why, again, it is important. So this is, unfortunately, we have no like a special courses, I don't know, special policy maybe on development of these structures at the national level. So we have no special instruments for stimulation of their development. And that is why, as I mentioned, Association for Community Self-Organization Assistance with their partners in different regions try to support, develop such trainings, to provide these trainings to different stakeholders, etc. But this is not enough. And again, we regularly ask different donors, not only our foundation, please support these kinds of initiatives, because they are extremely important for the future of Ukraine. Thank you.
I will. One of my questions will be about the future of Ukraine in context of these kinds of self-mobilization activities. But one more question that I wanted to ask before that is, who typically are people who are engaged in such organizations? Who would have enough willpower to form them? Are they people who are somehow linked with local level politics, or are just regular local citizens? Is there some trend there?
If you're speaking about our experience maybe 10 years ago, maybe, the majority of the members of this self-organization body that was like a pensioners, frankly speaking. So this is old people mostly, who would like to continue maybe their daily activity, who cannot sitting, yes, only at home and do nothing practically, and they would like to continue their work in different way, and they would like to use their experience, knowledge, etc., for the development of this small like sub-community, yes, at the and big community level. So that was the practice of last maybe 10-15 years. For now, I should say that already a number of middle-aged people who would like be a part of these bodies are growing maybe. Because, for example, now we seen growing the number of another kind of structures. They are quite similar like these condominiums in Europe. But in parallel, the condominiums cannot solve, for example, very specific problems like connected with social, humanitarian issues, etc., etc. They are only focused only on the communal services, mostly in the houses. And in these cases, very often the heads of these condominiums became the initiators of creation of self-organization bodies like additional structures to these condominiums, because in this way they can cover additional spheres, additional areas of work, and in this micro community, and in this case the middle-aged people became more active and enter to the structure of these self-organization bodies.
Excellent, thank you. So I see that there are different ways how a person can decide to become part of such a body. Okay, so to conclude this discussion, my final question to both of you, to both Oleksiy, is that from what I have understood from both of your presentations, is that basically Ukraine during the last decade at least has been trying to mobilize people, especially at the local level, and has been quite successful at that compared to my country. if we are looking at participatory budgeting projects, and also that these kinds of self-organized citizen bodies even exist, and also e-petitioning. My question to both of you would be, to what extent do you feel that when there is something, a really deep crisis, and in your case it's war, this kind of contact, this kind of civic engagement skills are or are not useful? Are they transferable to other domains as well, or are they strictly based in that one particular topic in which this person was interested, and do not really form like those more deeper roots in society that help in really terrible times as well?
Start.
Yeah, you can start, Oleksiy, please.
Because actually I think that self-organized bodies are more relevant, here. So, but it doesn't matter how you start actually. If talking about e-petitions, I guess that they are more harmful in this crisis. So that's why in most of cities have switched off the possibility of e-petitioning, because actually now it can only take more resources, and there can be some provocations and so on and so forth. So I do not know how petitions can be helpful while at least while we have hostilities on the territory of the country. Maybe after, yes, it's about setting public policy priorities and agenda setting, and they might be helpful there. But regarding, of course, regarding participatory budgeting, of course, during the war, I think this mechanism has no chances to be used because actually there is no money, at least, no money in the budgets, no development, no special revenues. Everything is spent on the war. And of course, it will not be a priority. But if talking about after-war recovery, then participatory budgeting might be a very good mechanism showing the authorities what people are oriented to recover first, what do they think should be the priorities of recovery, and so on and so forth. So in post-war recovery, I guess participatory budgeting mechanism might be very, very helpful. Yeah, and of course, probably the most helpful might be electronic consultations. That's why we need to develop this tool very intensively. But I think that in our case, public consultations, it's a bit opposite case if compared with participatory budgeting. So participatory budgeting works well in Ukraine because there is no legal regulation, and electronic consultation doesn't work well because there is no legal regulation, because actually Ukrainian civil society for years is struggling for framework law on public consultations because we do not have it, and local self-government bodies, if compared with executive authorities, have no obligations to consult actually, except on several cases. Yeah, so they do not have obligations to consult on public policy. So this tool probably should be developed further in Ukraine, and of course it might be helpful. Yeah, and even during the war, it might be helpful. Yeah, but we do not have it enough operational.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and in the context of self-organization, probably I should say that self-organization, maybe this is one of the key elements of our war against Russia, because this is critically important element of consolidation of our society for now. And this is not the first example. I should say, for example, in 2014, we had practically the same situation when this war practically started. I should say that many self-organization bodies, and this is true, this is reality of our life, self-organized for defense of their small communities, their small territories against Russian troops, for example. So, for example, in Kyiv, we have some districts, some mini districts, which self-organized and have been ready for any aggression from Russia side. And after war, I should say, I supposed, and I'm absolutely sure that the role of such structures will grow. Because from my point of view, the self-organization bodies can play a significant role of, again, in self-organizing people for reconstruction, for support of other people in concrete territories, in some cases on social, humanitarian points of view, etc., etc. So I see a really strong positive development of the self-organization bodies. But again, we need made some concrete steps. For example, as I mentioned in the beginning, at the beginning of my presentation, that we need to update a little bit our legislation in this area and give some additional sphere, some additional chance for practical work, daily work for self-organization bodies. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Yes, self-organization is something that Latvia is just right now trying to appreciate enough, because previously we were quite reliant on what municipalities and the government was doing, but seeing how Russia invaded Ukraine and to what extent self-organization was really key, to defense of Ukraine, it's clear that somewhere people need to obtain the relevant skills and contacts to be able to engage in this. Of course, people also learn by doing, but the preparedness is key and much more effective if it is based on something that has already existed. So in this sense, I think it really makes so much sense what you just said, Oleksiy. So thank you so much, both of you, both Oleksiy Kolesnikov and Oleksy Orlovsky. With this, we conclude our first discussion. I think that there might be some other subject matters which might be just as relevant, where usually the knowledge stream goes from European Union to Ukraine, but it should rather go both ways, if not from Ukraine to European Union, and everything related to societal resilience and societal mobilization is extremely topical and important in this particular context. Also, thank you everyone who was watching this live and who will be watching the recordings. They will be available on the website of Providus.